Why did you come on the job, whichever first responder it is, right? And then remember what your purpose is. And I lost my purpose, Ed, I would say over the last couple of years, right? I was kind of chasing the grind and the dollar, et cetera. And again, working with my coach, he had said to me, I'm trying to kind of again figure out what that was, but like what is the purpose of my life? And that's to be, an entrepreneur, a family man, an inspirational leader. And like I can go into the whole thing, but no matter what I do, if it aligns with that purpose, then I'm happy. Okay. And that purpose for me is being, a great family man, an entrepreneur, an inspirational leader. Right. So here I am doing that, hopefully with you in our community, being an inspirational leader. And that is giving me my purpose, which is not in a uniform anymore. Right. That uniform, we tie a lot of, whether you do it or not, you tie a lot to that uniform or the shield or the fire helmet or whatever. But what is your purpose outside of that? You got to discover that.
This is Blue Leader Nation. Blue Leader Nation. We're here to develop those men and women in law enforcement who want to be respected leaders and to mold you into becoming a legendary leader. If it's leadership, personal growth, and self-development, we're talking about it. Whether you're new or a veteran, you've found your new home. This is the Blue Leader Nation. Now, here's your host, Dr. Ed Pallas.
Welcome back to the Blue Leader Nation podcast. I'm your host, Ed Pallas, and I'm pretty excited today. We have retired NYPD Detective George Sichler. He's got a life and a career that I think you're going to be pretty excited to hear about. George, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Hi, Ed. Thanks. I'm great.
I really appreciate you being here. So before we get into your speaking, your book, your resilience message, can you give us, our listeners and our watchers on YouTube, your kind of origin story?
Yeah. So I graduated college and I never got, I guess, the adrenaline excitement bug out of myself. My father was an NYPD cop back in the 60s and 70s. He got hurt by 3/4. I joined the police department in 2018, went into the South Bronx and patrol. About 2002, I went into special operations, and then I was there in special ops till about 2014. And then I went down to headquarters for a little bit. To kind of use my brain instead of my body for a little bit. And it was great. I was in the investigative track at that point and just really kind of wanted to retire in the team camaraderie that I guess I was so used to in that special ops role. And then I ended up going back from headquarters back to the Bronx, and I retired out of the gang squad in the Bronx.
Wow. And maybe I misheard. When did you start? I thought you said 2018, but that can't be right. When did you start?
I'm sorry, 98. I went 98 to 2018. Maybe I
Gotcha.
but it was 98 to 2018, retired. And then I went to work in what I'll call the industry. And the industry was kind of, when I was an old team guy, our sales rep would come in, and I ended up getting to be very, very good friends with our sales rep, and, kind of ran around with him and a couple of other guys for years and years and years. And just, kind of socially, and I'm helping him out at a trade show here and there. I was like, well, this idiot can do this. I can do this. So then I was in the tactical medical space. I was teaching a lot in the firearms community, and firearms and medicine kind of going together there. So I spoke both of those languages from special ops, did some work in the movies. I ended up kind of cross-pollinating with a group, really a great friend of mine, Harry Humphreys, who, I mean, if you IMDb Harry, they cut off his pages because he had so many movies, but I ended up doing John Wick, Underground 6, Ninja Turtles, a whole bunch of movies I ended up doing with that. And then just because of that background and cross-pollinating in special ops and then through the industry for so many years. And I also spoke CBRN, weapons of mass destruction, just as an add-on specialty. And then I went into the chemical decon space, and now I'm in the space doing new product development for Mira Safety, which is, I think, how we connected.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to unpack. All right. Yeah. I got to imagine some people are going to be in, and I hate to niche down on this, but tell us a little bit about John Wick. What was your experience with that movie?
Everybody, I only started really telling that story in the last couple of months, just because it was always one of those really kind of keep it quiet. And it was one of my first films. And Harry, who he was a West Coast based SEAL, Dick Marcinko era, Vietnam era SEAL. And then he and I linked up through another SEAL, a friend of his, who was somebody that I was cross pollinating with in my unit. We became good friends, ended up going into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, and then ended up working with Harry, and Harry would usually kind of give me a piece of stuff that was on the East Coast. So John Wick 1, nobody knew what it was going to be at the time.
No.
But nobody had any idea. So it was really my first foray that I can remember into like the technical advising and technical consulting space, at least on my own, right? I had kind of done it with Harry a little bit here and there, and got there, and I was a little bit shy. I'm not a shy person, but you just kind of really, you have a lot of integrity that needs to be upheld, right? When you come from that cloth of those guys. So, I wasn't as boisterous and gregarious as I normally would be, but ended up working with Keanu down in Manhattan. They closed down the West Side gun range, and I had taught him some CQB work there.
Wow.
And then he was adamant about doing live fire training, which to me was new with the actors at the time. And we really I tried to talk him out of it, and he was adamant about doing it. So then I ended up working with him a couple of days at a live fire outdoor range. And that's kind of, everybody loves it now. They know where the Wick flick came from. So I told him, don't do that. It's stupid. So he and I would be training, and then we'd be loading magazines and stuff. And then the range safety officer, he would just be out there kind of just, running some reps and drills on his own. He had this move that he would do this, flick the gun, turn 360. And Keanu saw that. He was like, hey, what is that? What is that all about? And the guy tries to come up with an explanation. He explains it to him. And I didn't see the tactical prowess in that. And I said, listen, like no one does that.
Right.
I'm fortunate enough to have been running in these circles for more than a handful of years, and if the tier 1 guys were doing it, or even regular Army was doing it anywhere along I'd say would have watered down to me at this point, and I don't know it. And this is why we don't do it. And I said, it's stupid, don't do it. And he ended up doing it, and it became the thing. So I trained him for a handful of days. And then when everybody sees him on, I guess on YouTube, when he's out at Taron Butler, I had him prior to that. And then, obviously Taron is just an upper tier echelon shooter, which I'm sure took him to a whole different level than what I was able to bring him to. So, but that's kind of the story behind that.
That's awesome. Now I got to ask, because, having never met the guy, his reputation is he's very much, wants to master his craft. And then the other thing about him is humility. Did that come across during your days with him?
I would say a little bit, but I was still so naive at the time. Like I didn't kind of, cross that barrier of like hanging out buddy, like, some of the other advisors will get, as the project moves on. It's only had him a handful of days, but he was very, very serious about training. Like he really wanted to know it very, very well. He was just a very easygoing guy. But I will, I'll say too, because of the group that I was running with, they were a very big deal to do in Hollywood. And they still do some crazy projects. I mean, they do 13 Hours and Terminal List and all those projects. Those are those guys in that group that I had come from. And he was just a nice guy, but I was still naive at the time to really kind of, yuck it up, so to speak. But then as I got further into it, where I was doing some other projects, you could have a little bit of fun back and forth with that, with that talent. But they usually treated us very, very well because, we were just, in a good spot to teach them a craft, which was not something that was typically, known to them.
Was there anything else you did as a technical advisor? Did they ever come to you and say, hey, would this be a realistic thing to do? How does that work?
Yeah. So in John Wick, no, I wasn't on set for that, but I think, what was I on set for? Ninja Turtle. I was on set for Ninja Turtles. That's what I remember. Obviously a lot of green screen stuff there, but basically so there's a couple of different silos in the projects that I've done. And sometimes you get, the main talent. Sometimes you get what's called the special category extra, which is an extra, but they have to be able to, move and shoot, or they might have to know martial arts. And that's obviously not me. Or they might have to do something else special. You would get a special category extra in that, or a group of them, and train that group. And then usually at that point, we would be on set with the director and the producer, and we were, I won't say that I was a big deal in the pecking order, so to speak, right? Like I'm, halfway down the call sheet. But when it comes time to filming, usually the technical advisor, it's the director and the cameraman, and then you're right there behind them being like, okay, that looked good. This was terrible, and then, again, the whole, there's creative liberties that they'll take with it, but that's usually how that would roll. So.
Well, that's pretty cool. I don't think many people their claim to fame, or part of their claim to fame is they were one of the original people to help John Wick learn how to shoot, or Keanu Reeves learn how to shoot. So that's pretty cool. I love it. Gosh, there's so much else I want to ask you about. So your bio talks about facing personal, professional, even financial hardships without asking you to relive every difficult chapter. What was one moment that forced you to decide whether you were going to break, bend, or rebuild?
There's a handful, right? And I would say that from a personal standpoint that affected me professionally. In 2004, my wife and I lost our first son. And the guys on the team were as supportive as anyone could be. Okay. When you come from a group of alpha males like that, and then, you're physically and emotionally broken, and then they showed up to the funeral or to the wake, in the burial in uniform, and with the PD vans, etc. And that was one thing. And then I really only kind of realized this in my journey of resiliency, that I look back, and probably about 6 months after that, where everybody kind of the outside world kind of moves on at that point. I think you've moved on, but I learned that I wasn't. And that affected me professionally, to the point that, I wasn't a nice person to be around. Let's just put it that way. And not really, and I didn't understand it at the time. This is 2004, 2005. So we didn't have the tools that are available to first responders or veterans today. They existed, but they were very much more in the background, so to speak. And I will say, was not a nice person to be around, and just not realizing what that was. I only realized it, the God's honest truth, was probably about a month or 6 weeks ago. I looked back and reflected on some of those times, and I said, holy smokes. I said, I was still in the anger phase of grief and was taking it out on people at work. And then that begins that, that dynamic. So, it was one of my teammates that said to me at one point in there, he goes, man, you're just not a lot of fun to be around anymore. And that was leveling. And, for one of the guys that I loved the most, respected the most, and was like, nobody wants to be around me anymore. So I kind of I had to pivot myself and kind of realize that, but never really understood why, until, again, really about 6 weeks ago. So that was something that I just kind of had to, grin and bear it through. I'll give you another one. Like, I could talk about this all day.
Please.
I didn't realize it until, so my wife didn't even know until in the last couple of months. So when I retired, right, first response, especially in the law enforcement capacity, we always look at that countdown clock. So like when I speak, I say to people, I go, how long till you retire? And they can spit it out like that. It's contagious toxicity. Okay. I can go to the police academy today and say to a recruit, when can you retire? And he's going to spit out that date, or she's going to spit out that date. Contagious toxicity. And when it got to my retirement, I was down in headquarters, and I just spoke about this for the first time at NYTOA, New York Tactical Officers, a couple of weeks ago. Put it up on the screen, and my wife said to me that day in the retirement section, she goes, "Why don't you look happy?" And I had to act happy. I didn't know what to do, right? Like, I just you gear up for it for so long. My kids were there, they're smiling, your teammates are there smiling, you made it, you're out of here, you got friends there. And then I was literally just sitting there saying to myself, like, I'm not ready to leave. Like, I'm kind of afraid to leave. I knew I was going to be okay, right? Because as an entrepreneur, and a consultant for so long, even kind of leading up to that, like, I knew I was going to be on my feet. But it was another person, again, it was a John O'Hara, who I interviewed him for my book, he had 40 years on the job when he retired. So he did 2 of my careers. And John had said to me, he said, he was the one that I don't know if he coined it or not, but I take it from him, the loss of professional purpose, right? And not realizing that loss of professional purpose there. So, I remember my wife saying that to me, in the retirement section that day, acting as everything's okay. There's pictures and all that sort of stuff, and the kids are smiling. And then it was only about 6 months or a year ago where she said to me, she goes, "Were you ready to retire?" And I said, "No." And I brought up that story, So listen, it's, there's so many things we can talk about. And I guess really at the end of the day, when I was brought up in my generation, right, starting in the late 90s, this type of conversation could be deemed as weakness. Yeah. Okay. And what I say to people now that are listening to you or I'm on stage somewhere, I'm talking about this today. Am I weak to you? So I want to be able to make people pivot and say, you know what? I signed up for this job. It's the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And I would do it all over again, but it came with baggage. And I wish I knew what that baggage was going to be in 1998. Because they said to me, the job is going to change you. The job is going to change you. The job is going to change you. And I sat there, I can't wait. I can't wait. Like I'm going to be a tough guy and I'm going to be seeing all these great things. Like, what am I looking for? Just the job's going to change you, kid. How? Okay. But I think now the group of first responders that, have some experience, not just including me, but that are able to kind of give you their experience and couple it with some of these loss of professional purpose, breaking stigma, what's another one? I can't think of the name off the top of my head right now, but, lack of purpose. And what's the other one? Compassion fatigue, right? All of these different things that really weren't known to me in the late 90s or even up until the end of my career. I learned about these things 5 years after I was retired. I said to my wife, I looked at her, we were watching somebody speak, and I looked at her and I go, is that me? When the guy was and I was like, that's the reason why I behave like that. And if we take that as an instructor, right? We take that why, and I go back to like when I was teaching Keanu and we talked about the Wick flick. And I say, okay, we don't do that. This is the reason why. Let's unpack the reason why behind that. So we don't do that because, it's wasted movement. It's this, you're losing your peripheral vision here and there, your eyes off the thread, all these different things, right? Like the industry standard is one thing. This is the reason why we don't do that. Or this is the reason why we do that. No one ever gave me the reasons why, right? So that to me is such a powerful tool where the job is going to change you. How, why, what's it going to be? Give us the tools, equip us with the tools.
So it's funny you say that. I'm out on the road quite a bit. I started in 95 and my wife and I both just retired last September. And so I'm out on the road quite a bit. I'm based in Maryland, but I was just up in Connecticut doing a class. And yesterday we were talking about this exact issue. And I think we've gotten a lot better than we have in the mid early 90s, but we're not there yet. There's still the stigma. I think people are becoming more aware of how much this job changes us. But I think we got a long ways to go.
We do. I'm sorry to cut you off there.
No, please.
I want to bring it into morbidity, but I lost a retired friend to suicide a week ago, right? A guy that I worked with that was the heartbeat of our command. This is literally 7 days ago. So, and I sit there and you probably feel the same way. And the people that speak in this space feel the same way. It's like, damn, like he didn't, like if I could have given him my message, like what happened? Like we said on the job, that if you call 1013, officer needs assistance, I'm going to die getting to you.
Yep.
Now I can't save you afterwards. Like to me, there's a piece of me that feels like I have failed and we have failed as a profession, right? A profession that swore to stick together, right? And that can be debated, but I experienced again 7 days ago.
So since you mentioned that, a lot of first responders, like you said, we're great at performing under pressure.
Yep.
But we're not really great at recovering after pressure. Your story is a case in point. What have you learned about the difference between toughness? Because you mentioned, being a tough guy earlier, but the difference between how we're all taught to be tough guys and girls, but what's the difference between toughness and resilience?
So just, I'll give you a definition, then I'll give you a story, right? So that
Right.
resilience is kind of being able to take the hit and bounce back from it. Okay.
Right.
So what I learned from me, and I think a lot of people can relate to me. When I speak on stage, I don't give you war stories. Everybody's got a war story. Everybody's been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Okay. We all have stories to talk about. What it did for me being that tough guy was it made me emotionally numb, where again, I realized this 14 days ago when I was out to dinner with my wife talking about something. So Easter Sunday, her and I were flying down to Florida. I was going down to play in a golf tournament. Easter Sunday, it's at dinner time. The guy in back of us has a heart attack, drops dead. Okay. So we're 30 minutes from landing. Her and I, she's a firefighter. Her and I grab the dude. We do CPR for 30 minutes, bagging him for 30 minutes as the plane lands in the middle of the aisle. Okay. Now she's only a firefighter for a couple of years. It doesn't have the bandwidth or the breadth of experience that I've got over almost 30 at this point. Okay. So paramedics come in, they throw him on a Skedco, they rip him out of there, whatever. I sit back down because we're not at the gate. I sit back down, put my headphones on, start watching the movie. Right. Like to me, it's, like, and then she's sitting there like there's her head spinning. You can see the stars coming. Everybody's looking at me like, and I'm just a dude sitting there with headphones on trying to finish watching my movie. Right. So we get off and there was dark humor. Okay. So there's some dark humor that because she's trying to process it, and I give her the dark humor, right? Because that's what I learned. That's what I was taught. So fast forward a week, we're at NYTOA, and I'm speaking on resilience, and she said to me, she goes, when something happens to one of my kids, like they fall down, break their arm, or scratch or need stitches or whatever, I'm not the same person. And what I realized that day, 7 days ago or 14 days ago, was and we all do it. And we all do it. And I didn't realize that I did it. I made the man not human for me, right? Where to me, he was just another job. But my wife is sitting there saying he was a husband, a father, a son, a brother, or whatever. Like I sat back down, put on my movie. It's like, it's just another DOA. But when something happens to my kids, I'm not able to separate that. So that collective and cumulative trauma over decades that I said I can't wait to go to the next one, and I would gladly run out the door and assist anybody today. I would do it again, made me emotionally numb. And that's one of the things that I think, had I learned that in the academy and they said, this is going to happen to you, look for these red flags. That's one of those things where I go, I caught it in time. Okay. The dark humor was me making that person not human. And that's not appropriate, right? That's just not appropriate. But it's how I and a bunch of us will protect ourselves from a lifetime of trauma that I said, I can't wait to go to the next one.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Is there a point where these almost become like drops in the bucket and we stay emotionally numb for 20 or 30 years, or like you said, maybe it's several years after retirement, and then all of a sudden it surfaces, or maybe at some point the bucket overflows? Can we continue to be that emotional numb professional, and we all use that dark humor, but at some point, how do we stop that bucket from overflowing?
It's a great question. And I think the way we utilize peers is somewhat beneficial in that aspect. And again, in my career, okay, I won't speak for everybody else's career. In my career, right, I worked in a very, very busy and dangerous place in the South Bronx in the late 90s. And after a 4 to 12, we would turn that into a 4 to 4, and you understood what happens at that point. Okay. Yep. What I realized, again, I was retired, was we were off-gassing, talking to our peers that experienced those same things that night, but we had that crutch of alcohol that was a social drinking kind of thing. If we can remove that bad element and just talk to guys and gals about, last night sucked, bro.
Yeah.
And remove that element that my generation had. And I think this new generation has slowly moved away from that. And that's a great thing. But my generation and the generations before me, and it still exists, but there was, if you didn't go out for the 4 to 4, What's wrong with this guy?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I get a lot from when I'm out on the road talking and speaking and teaching is the newer generation or even the newer groups of cops don't do any sort of bonding. There's no camaraderie. Like you show up for your shift and you go home after your shift. And at best, I'm hearing, you might jump on and play video games with each other for a few hours. So I think I get what you're saying, where that decompression is really important.
Yeah.
Obviously the alcohol could be dangerous, but I don't even think they're getting together with or without alcohol, getting together to decompress.
So I'm hearing that anecdotally a little bit more and more, right? And it's something that I'm trying to figure out what that universe looks like, because, my generation signed up to be a police officer. I ask it on stage, why did you become a police officer? Why did you become an EMT or a firefighter, whatever? It's like, it's usually to help people, family business, whatever. I hear more often now in this newer generation, they didn't want to work at Home Depot or IBM or work for UPS. There's a little bit of a difference there. And I couldn't wait to join the Brotherhood. And I wanted it to suck. I wanted it to suck because I wanted to be there shoulder to shoulder with you, Ed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And and that sucked together. Okay. And that's where that bond had formed. So I'm hearing that and seeing that a little bit more anecdotally, and that pendulum is starting to swing into that younger, newer generation. I've always said policing is generational, right? My father was a cop in the 60s. They had the Black Panthers. The was the crack and drug epidemic and crime epidemic in New York City. So when those guys in the 80s that were rock'em sock'em to me in the 90s, my father's telling the guys in the 80s, the job is dead, kid. The guys in the 80s are telling me the job is dead, kid. Right? Like, so it's generational, right? Like every generation deals with their own issues. My generation, I felt, was the tail end of higher crime and the influx of terrorism. This new generation gets terrorism, but civil disobedience on a scale that I never experienced before. Right. And I wouldn't know how to deal with that because I didn't have the tools. Our tools were not applicable to how to handle that today. Right. So every generation has their own little different issues. And I think it's being compounded a little bit, again, anecdotally, with this newer generation taking the job of a first responder because they didn't want to do something else. They didn't do it for the brotherhood, to help somebody, for the family legacy. I'm seeing that as a little bit different. And a guy like me, I wouldn't say I have a hard time with it. It's difficult to process because we're different now, but we all wore the same uniform, right? But we're doing it for the same reasons, right? So like, I'm literally unpacking that now over the last handful of months as I've seen that trend started to kind of creep up.
All right. So I want to focus on something. You mentioned tools. Any tools that you recommend, and I know you have a bunch, but is there one or two tools that you can recommend to the cops that are out there right now to deal with these drops in this stress bucket, to maybe prevent them from becoming emotionally numb? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say for me, my superpower was my family, where, my work schedule in the special ops team was, we did 12-hour tours and I lived 2 hours away. I had to live there for 3 days in a row. I did that for over a decade. So when I would come home, I could flip that switch and we would just focus on the kids and the family element and unit. And we usually would do fun things. And because, who could go to Great Wolf Lodge or Sesame Place on a Tuesday and Wednesday? We could, right? Because we had, because I don't care. Kindergarten's not that important. We're going, So that was one of the things. I do enjoy getting out, and I need adrenaline. And I get that still through some sort of an outdoor sport or activity, skiing, ice climbing, rock climbing, mountaineering, something along those lines where there's a penalty for screwing up, right? I still need some of that adrenaline, but also the recovery. And I've gotten into recovery a lot over the last 2 years. I sauna and cold plunge at least 4 nights a week. If I can get it in 7, I get it in 7. And that therapy for me, just to kind of go in there, and I won't bring my phone in. If I do bring my phone in, I hate myself for doing it, but you just kind of sit there. And decompress for 20 minutes, 25 minutes in the sauna. I have one at my house. I'm fortunate. And then I'll do, maybe I can tolerate 2 or 3 minutes of meditation at first. That's about as much as I can tolerate. And then I'll get out and I'll go in the plunge right away. That to me is very beneficial. And the one thing that I did adopt very recently was gratitude. And if you would have said that to me in the year 2000, I would have told you to go take a hike. But I work with a business coach, and the business coach said to me, he said, if I would have said to you in 1998, and I gave you the life that you have today in 1998, what would you have said? And I would have said, sign me up. But I wasn't satisfied yet. And he says, that's because you're not grateful. And to getting up every morning before I get out of bed and not doing the, oh, I'm grateful for waking up, kind of thing. Yes, it's fortunate, right? But what happened yesterday that I was grateful for? Okay. I went fishing with my wife and my son, right? Like I'm grateful for that opportunity. My son's leaving for the Air Force in 6 months, right? Like it's coming to an end for me, but being able to look at gratitude and not from material things. And yes, I'm grateful for, a house to live in and that kind of thing. But what happened to me yesterday, I'm grateful for I'll wake up tomorrow morning. So I'm grateful for Ed's interview, right? Like that to me is not a normal thing, right? Like you didn't have to give me that opportunity. But if you can recognize, for me, I'm the definition of toxic masculinity, okay? Saying to you and to the guys and gals listening, wake up tomorrow morning and say 3 things to yourself that you are thankful for. To me, it puts me off on the right foot every day, as opposed to a handful of years ago when I would get up in the morning and put the news on and just get irritated right away.
Yeah.
Leave it off. I wake up in the morning and say, what am I grateful for? Or what am I going to do today that I'm going to be grateful for? And I do 3 things every day.
Yeah. If anybody has had me instructing or facilitating one of their classes, they know that I'm a big proponent of gratitude journaling. I'm super passionate about gratitude journaling, and I do the same thing. I do it in the morning. I actually write it down. And I have people do a little exercise in class. And I said, this is 60 seconds a day. It's not much. But if you're in that moment for that 60 seconds, that can really direct the rest of your day to look for things that you're grateful for. And I always quote a study by Robert Edmonds. And basically that group said doing that just 4 to 5 days a week will make you 25% happier. Well, when I was working, I would say it would be likely to make me 25% less an asshole and come back and bring that home to my family and infect them with those toxic emotions and all that baggage we carry from work. So I'm so glad to hear you say that, to talk about gratitude, being grateful, and how that wouldn't have reached you way back in the day, right? Because we got to be met where we are.
There's no way if a guy on patrol or in my unit said to me 10 or 15 years ago, maybe there was people practicing that, I wasn't ready to hear it. No. Okay. It's not, and I would have dismissed it and be like, that's insane. Let's just go hard charge something and let's be done with it. But here I am, right? At, again, 1998, I've been a first responder. I'm still a first responder, in a volunteer capacity, but, almost 30 years I'm doing this, and I can sit here and say, I would do it all over again. Yes, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts or the drops in the bucket or whatever, metaphor you want to use. But to me, the whole fact that I'm grateful for the things that I'm fortunate enough to do that other people aren't, I'm very, very grateful.
All right. So you've given us a bunch of tools. You've given us some great insights, some really good stories. Is there anything else, any other tool or any other story you want to share for that next generation of law enforcement? Because I try to get people like you on here that are going to come and talk and add value to the Thin Blue Line. And you've absolutely done that. And I am grateful for you doing that. But is there anything else you want to say to that next generation that's out there struggling today?
I would say, get back to the brotherhood. Okay. Get back to doing the right thing for the right reason and sharing that bond with the people that you work with and for. Okay. That includes people that, that retired, respect the time, respect the work that they put in before you to get there, et cetera. Like, to me, like I could never have worked at IBM. I could never have worked for UPS. Like I needed that camaraderie that was bigger than me, and I still do it. And when I retired, a mentor said to me, you probably heard it, when you retire, you lose two things, your sense of identity and or your sense of community. And if you can't replace one of those two things, you're not going to be happy in retirement. And there's very few people that I see, 1 in 100, that do nothing associated with any sort of their former life and are happy. I had to go into the tactical medical space to be a industry representative so I could go back to seeing guys and gals in uniform and helping them and teaching them. And hey, this is how they do it in New York. This is how they do it in LA. This is how they do it in Texas. And the same thing. It's the reason why I still do it, because it still gives me that sense of professional purpose for the community that I had to be a part of. Right. So just remember that. Why did you come on the job, whichever first responder it is, right? And then remember what your purpose is. And I lost my purpose, Ed, I would say over the last couple of years, right? I was kind of chasing the grind and the dollar, et cetera. And again, working with my coach, he had said to me, I'm trying to kind of, again, figure out what that was, but, like, what is the purpose of my life? And that's to be, an entrepreneur, a family man, an inspirational leader. And like, I could go into the whole thing, but no matter what I do, if it aligns with that purpose, then I'm happy. Okay. And that purpose for me is being, a great family man, an entrepreneur, and an inspirational leader. Right. So here I am doing that, hopefully with you in our community, being an inspirational leader. And that is giving me my purpose, which is not in a uniform anymore. Right. That uniform, we tie a lot of, whether you do it or not, you tie a lot to that uniform or the shield or the fire helmet or whatever. But what is your purpose outside of that? You got to discover that.
Yeah, I always love it when I see cops retire, not to leave their agency, but to go to that next stage, just like you've done in your life. And speaking of that, you mentioned entrepreneur. If somebody wants to, contact you to maybe do some speaking or talk about tactical medical supplies, and I'll put this in the show notes, but where can we reach you? Tell us a little bit about your website. Tell me a little bit about your speaking offerings.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, right, we're here because of, Mira Safety, which I do that stuff, that product development for them, which is fantastic agency gear for guys and gals that might have to go into that protective ensemble. Or you can find me at my website, georgesichler.com, Sichler. And then we actually just did start a school community called the Resilience Lab. So a lot of the things I'm speaking about, and it's free, a lot of the tools I'm speaking about are in that Resilience Lab. And you can just go in there and kind of go through there's a course, and then you get the downloads. And it's kind of what I did at NYTOA. And I'm bringing that across to 3 more events for them this year. But that whole concept of finding your purpose, why do you do what you do? And yes, the uniform is a very important part of me. One of the programs that I'm doing in there is called PTSD, but it's purpose through strength and development. Right. So let me take what made me who I am, and I gladly did it, but let me use it and empower myself, right? Find my purpose through strength and developing myself. So that's all within that Resilience Lab.
Well, brother, thank you again for coming on here and adding value to the Thin Blue Line. I appreciate your service, both in uniform and the way you're continuing to serve the men and women on the Thin Blue Line. So I hope maybe I can have you back on here at a future date, but thank you so much.
I'd love to. Thanks, Ed.
And to all the listeners and watchers, appreciate you tuning into the Blue Leader Nation podcast. Until the next episode, stay safe and lead well.
Passion is anyone within the Thin Blue Line who want to take it to the next level. We hope you didn't mind the dad jokes, by the way. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at www.blueleadernation.com.